topic this evening is the future of the American dream, impact of the 2020 census on immigrants. The library here offers a lot of services for immigrants, and we just want to give them a moment to share some of those services just so you are aware of them. I'd like to welcome attorney Lori Hausman from Library Services to give us a brief overview of the services here.
Hi. Thanks for coming tonight. We love having events like this at the library, and it's a pleasure to have everyone here. My name is Lori Hausman. I'm the lead immigration counselor at the American Place. The American Place, or TAP as we affectionately like to call it, provides a lot of different services. Obviously legal services, that's what I supervise. It also provides adult education, which includes career pathways, which has a whole Serve Safe program. I'm going to mainly talk about the immigration services. Our focus in the immigration services is citizenship. We help people prepare applications. We give them legal counseling. We provide them with education resources as well as classes if they do want to take classes, and tutoring to get you through the process. The top 3 reasons that my clients tell me why they want to become U.S. citizens are: number 1, to have the right to vote. As a permanent resident, you are still subject to the laws of the United States. You still have to pay taxes. In order to have a voice, in order to elect a representative who is sensitive to your personal issues, you need that right to vote. The second top reason is so you can travel longer than 6 months. There are a lot of people who, as a permanent resident, you're not supposed to leave the United States for more than 6 months at a time. As a U.S. citizen, you can live abroad. Lastly, it's the ability to petition for family members. As a U.S. citizen, you can petition for everybody from your parents to your siblings, and you can get them here faster. Now is the best time to become a U.S. citizen. There are a couple of big reasons why. Currently, there's a fee waiver available to households below the poverty line and in and around the poverty line. So if you qualify, you won't have to pay the filing fee, which is currently pretty high, but it will get higher. Secondly, enforcement is up. Regardless of whether or not the immigration laws have been changed or they're just proposals, everything's being looked at more closely, and you are safest as a U.S. citizen. Lastly, you don't have to give up your Caribbean passport. The laws have changed. You have to travel in and out of the United States on your U.S. passport, but you can keep your Caribbean passport safe in your pocket. We encourage everyone to become a U.S. citizen now while you still have the chance and the ability to do it under the current rules. So anyway, that having been said, you do not need to be a U.S. citizen in order to participate in the U.S. Census. Having a voice in the U.S. Census as a permanent resident, is one of the most important things that you can do. And my colleagues here tonight are going to explain to you just how important it is and how you can go about exercising your voice. Thank you.
Thank you. So I encourage everyone to come to the library and use the services that are offered here and check out books. Our moderator for the evening is Lisa Harrison. I'm going to introduce her. She can come to the podium. Lisa lives in Windsor, and she's active in the community doing advocacy work and youth leadership. Thank you, Lisa.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us this evening. I'm excited to be moderating this panel. This is my first moderator job, so please be gentle. I have a distinct privilege this evening to introduce to the microphone and to the moderator stage for the Q&A some of the most talented people that I've read about and met. It's a wonderful evening for me. The first of those is Dr. Fiona Vernal. Dr. Vernal is at University of Connecticut. She's the Associated Professor of History and Africana Studies at UConn. And she's next to the microphone here. She has a Bachelor's of Arts from Princeton an MA and PhD from Yale. She is a curator and creator of A Home Away from Home, Greater Hartford's West Indian Diaspora, and she'll be talking with us this evening about the demographic trends in Connecticut. Dr. Vinal?
Good evening. Thank you so much for coming out. I will be very brief. I've been asked to provide a brief demographic profile of Connecticut so that it can help to shape some of our discussions. According to the latest census estimates, Connecticut's population is approximately 3.5 million people. As a small state, a primary concern that you see in some of these figures has been the outmigration of young people from the state. So overall, Connecticut has been losing net population, especially among young people because of the employment profile and also because of the high cost of living in this state. Obviously, this refracts very differently in some of our major cities and also has important consequences in places like Waterbury and Bridgeport and Hartford, so for Connecticut's major cities. Some of the most important demographic trends to unfold in this state in the last decade since we conducted the last census in 2010 is that the West Indian population has now become the largest foreign-born population in the state, with Jamaicans comprising the largest proportion of that particular group. This particular demographic trend has been unfolding in the last 70 years. West Indians have been coming to the state since the 1940s, when they came here first to work in the tobacco industry and then began to get permanent residency. And then all of you are familiar with the immigration policies of the 1960s that created more liberal and open policies, as well as shifts in the 1980s that led to family reunification. The Puerto Rican population in the state comprises approximately 8%, so of the 3.5 million people, about 278,000 of them are Puerto Rican, and in the city of Hartford, that means that about 43% of the population identifies as Hispanic. The Puerto Rican population followed some of the same trends as the West Indian population, but there's also a significant proportion of folks who also were relocating from other states. So New York, for example, was the biggest draw, and then other folks started to migrate to Connecticut, but the tobacco industry also drew that particular population here. Hartford, in the last few decades, has become an African-American city, a West Indian city, and a Puerto Rican city. And all across the state, these major demographic changes that have been unfolding because of major labor policies and because of immigration policies has shifted the profile of what our major cities in the state looks like, and will play a really important role in the kinds of conversations we are having about how people get counted and what the purpose of the census is, and how these major populations have been undercounted in the past, and what kind of messaging will impact when and how people decide to come out for the census. I am happy to provide a wider profile, but we have been looking forward to having Dr. Nelson here for such a long time that I'm going to cede all the rest of my time to her so that we can hear from her, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Thank you.
At this point, we're going to have some input from Mr. Paul Fabula from the United States Census Office. The Census Office has asked us not to record this portion of the conversation. So, Mr. Fabula, if you would come to the microphone, why it's important. I've been looking forward to meeting this woman for many, many months, and I'm so excited to have the opportunity to bring her to the microphone this evening. Dr. Claire Nelson is an internationally recognized futurist and expert in populations and change. When Violetta and I were talking about this program, we described her as the ultimate strategic thinker. She thinks about the strategies of what the world will look like in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years. And I just think that's the coolest thing. So I'm so excited to hear what she's going to say to us this evening. But I have to get some of the particulars in here. Dr. Nelson is the president of the Institute of Caribbean Studies. I already mentioned that she's a strategic thinker. She's the founder of Caribbean American Heritage Month. She's an ideation leader of the Futures Forum. She has a bachelor and master's degree in industrial engineering for the State University of New York and Purdue University. She's a doctorate in engineering and engineering management from the George Washington University. She's a member of several National Honor Societies. She's received several commendations for leadership on the U.S. Congressional Record and was named White House Champion of Change in 2012, as shown here in her presentation. I'm delighted to bring her to the microphone this evening to share her thoughts and words with us. Thank you.
Oh. Imagine 2030. I thought I'd throw that up there and see how many people would support this potential headline in the Hartford Times. Not yet founded as a paper, but who knows, somebody might found an online paper. We have a Times? Oh, there you go. So, after 8 hours, hackers are still holding the healthcare conglomerate Balm and Gilead hostage. The company, founded as a joint venture between the NAACP and Hartford Healthcare back in 2020, has been a leader in personal medicine and promoting decreasing incidence of chronic diseases, hypertension, and diabetes in the Black community. It's over 10 million subscribers and 5,000 doctors and physician assistants who use the telehealth network are being redirected to local health centers. The hack has not been claimed by any of the usual terrorist organizations, leaving experts to wonder. How many people think that could happen? Fantastic. All right. Next headline. The Urban Digital Democracy Institute, a think tank founded by the American Mayors Alliance, have demonstrated the feasibility of passing laws at decreased costs while increasing the participation of citizens using online crowdsourcing as a means to create and edit proposed laws. To date, some 30 cities have joined the e-Governance 2030 initiative, which has become a model of e-government for cities and counties across America. How many people feeling that one? E-government. All right, a couple. E-courts. All right. Onward. And finally, in the energy news, the Hartford Renewable Energy Alliance announces its achievement of its goal to build a network of 10,000 clean energy pioneers, that is, people who are working in the energy space, committed to ensuring energy equity with the completion of its 100 microgrid projects at colleges and hospitals and other public buildings since the initiative was launched in 2020. How many people feel like in Hartford we could have 100 microgrid projects at colleges and hospitals using alternate energy? A couple. There we go. So, why are we here? I am here, or we are here, because we want to talk about this idea of the American dream. And for me, the challenges of this moment, indeed, in America are awe-inspiring at some level. And if not, sometimes I would say it could also be awful. We move between awful and awe-filled. So I want to, first of all, thank you for inviting me, to allow me this opportunity to explore in my own head and concretize for myself what it is that I, as a community leader and activist, want to help to bring into being. The more we talk about ideas, the more we clarify these in our head. Now, we know the American dream is this very powerful story about the future. It's a lodestar for progress and prosperity and equality that has deep meaning, not only in the United States, but all over the world. This idea that life can be better and richer for everyone has caused so many people to flock to these shores, right? Immigrants from almost every corner, in fact, I would say from every corner of the world have come to America in search of the American dream. The thing is that I believe that the fantasy that we saw on those 1960s, 70s, and even 80s sitcoms are not coming back. They're not coming back. It's a different era. And what we need now is a new vision that helps us to deal with the realities of where we are today as a country and as a world. We need to be asking new and challenging questions, such as how will the changes in economics and education and technology lead to a new, thriving American dream? And how are the different groups of people imagining what this could look like? And more importantly, how can we imagine what the American dream might look like in a more inclusive way? So where are we now? We are in a state of future shock, quite frankly. We live in a volatile world, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, what we call a VUCA world. And it would seem as if we're launching from crisis to crisis. I mean, every day, I don't watch the news anymore. I just don't watch the news anymore. I might look at it on my phone from time to time, but it's just too much stress, right? And we find that some of us escape into television wonderland. We're keeping our eyes focused on Queen Sugar while making empires out of being blackish and trying not to care about who will get away with murder, all the while not recognizing that, well, orange is the new black. I mean, this is kind of where people are. Mass shootings are commonplace. And so we are in a state of future shock. The fact that each and every one of us carries the construction of the future in our minds. And most of the times it's subconscious. And most of us are fueled by this mythology of the American dream, right? That if we work hard, we can be anything we want to be. Paupers can be princesses and princes. And the fact is, whatever the case, all of us as humans, as part of our species, Homo sapiens sapien, are hardwired to think about the future in some way or another. More recently, we have been hardwired to believe that the future is always going to be better than what we have in hand. But what is the 21st version of that? What is the future of a community, of Hartford, of the state of Connecticut, of the American society? Can we ensure that we create a future that has more people that are inclusive, that we have a society that takes into account the change in technology, change in policies, change in design, change in strategies that lead to the changes that have to happen if we are to survive our incredible genius? All of this demands that we look at the future quite differently. And I am launching my own gospel account of the future called A Smart Future. We want to have sustainable systems, be it water, education, transportation, food, healthcare. We want to have, more importantly, meaningful metrics, metrics that measure what matters. And in this case, I want to propose the idea of well-being and happiness as what really matters. We want to have agile, adaptable agency. Because after all, change is constant, exponential, and increasing. We want to be resilient with everlasting hurricanes and disasters and forest fires and what else? We have had hailstorms and tornadoes and cyclones recently. It never ends. We have to become resilient, more resilient. And we must think about transformative uses of technology. So, I want to explore this by trying to answer 4 quick questions. What does the emerging future look like? What is driving this future? What is the future we want? And how might we get there? Now, the United Nations says that if we step into the landscape, right? If we step into the landscape of the future, we will see that we have about 8.3 billion people. We have about half of them will be women in 2030. Towns and cities will be home to almost 5 billion people. And the number of megacities around the world will be the cities over 10 million, 41 megacities, and 2 will be in America, Los Angeles and New York. And of course, in America, you've heard all the numbers. I'm not going to go into that. But suffice it to say, in America in 2030, we'll have no majority race for children under 5. We're going to have a continuing incidence of multiracial marriages, 1 out of 7 marriages. And what will disappear, they say, from most people's homes is the sound of a child's voice. We will have an aging population. Now, with all of that, think about that home, that city, that community. And in that home, in that city, in that community, we're also having situations where wearable technology is commonplace. You are wearing your smartphone. I keep on telling people by the time I have my hearing aid, it's going to be a nano hearing aid, so I become a cyborg, right? So all of us are going to be walking around with technology. And then we're going to have, in education, we might have more universities that are not even so much the traditional university, because you can go online and take a MOOC. And so universities will be changing. In healthcare, you're going to have personalized medicine with microchip implants and more robots in healthcare, more and more robots in healthcare. Food will have vertical farming. Just so many things will be different if you think about the future. Lab-grown meat, I'm sure some of you have heard about that. In governance, we're talking about the situation where we have more vulnerability. And there is thinking that the federal debt will be so enormous, or I should say ginormous, that these debt payments will significantly constrain federal spending, and some state governments might even go bankrupt. So with all of that, as we think about that, and of course, as we talked about before, climate change, we recognize that we still have to function as a city within a country, within the idea of a global world. We are going to be fully global citizens. In fact, we talk about this era of life being the age of the Anthropocene. This is an era when humans for the first time have the power to impact the trajectory of the whole planet. There are no boundaries, you see, in this blue marble called planet Earth. Up in space, and we're talking about having a space force soon, we're going about privatization of space, there are no boundaries between countries. So this planetary civilization, we recognize that a pandemic, the flow of the ocean, the flow of data, are going to be what binds us together as a whole across the world. In fact, I like to say we're Homo sapiens sapien approaching godlikeness, approaching Homo Deus. What does it mean then as we think about the sea of change that we are awash in? Octavia Butler, in the parable of the sower, says God is change. Now, when the world around us is changing, the question we must ask is whether we're going to change or stay the same. Now, the Amish prove that you can choose to stay the same, right? So Hartford can decide, let's put a ring around our city and create a law that says we're going to just stay stuck in the 2020, and we're going to put in place policies that defend a particular lifestyle. That is a possibility. But the question is, if we are going to change, we must also confront the changes that we want to make to ensure that we change what is necessary to encourage and to keep going a flourishing and thriving future. The questions that we have to confront are, what changes are vital? And how do we implement those changes? And what is driving this future? Now, the National Intelligence Council talks about the fact that there are 4 mega trends that are driving our future. Individual empowerment. And if you think about what you can do with a smartphone, you know we're all pretty powerful people. Back in my days of going to engineering school, I used to have my big box of cards. Who remembers the big box of cards that we walked around with? And if they fell apart, I mean, God forbid, we'd have to figure out what order they're in. And so that is definitely not going to turn back. Then we have the question of diffusion of power. There's not going to be like one mega country anymore. We see China certainly jockeying in for first place, and India is quietly and stealthily doing what it needs to do. So you might see the news, China and America, but Russia is doing its own thing, and India is doing its own thing, but the experts believe there will be no one superpower in that time. Demographic patterns, resource stress rather, we have a situation where we're going to have changes in food and arable water. In fact, some cities in America are already water stressed. People are not paying attention to that. I don't know if Hartford is among them, but these are some of the issues that we have to pay attention to. So when we think about this future, the question is, how can we focus on what it means to think about the future of the American dream? I didn't talk about robots. I must talk about robots because that's a central point. What about the future of work? We know that everything is being automated and AI. Some of us have to either work in those companies, but we also are aware of all the time we call in an insurance company, we call our banks, we're calling doctors' offices, you put on hold, and AI. So the future of work is a major issue that many mayors are now trying to confront. What are we going to do with all these people if we're not able to do the workforce retraining and workforce development, and also think about what other new jobs we have put in place to keep people going. You know that we can have growth without jobs. There is such a thing as a jobless recovery, and this is something that we have to be very focused on. So, when we think about this future then, what does it mean? And I want to try to just run through because I don't want to run out of time. What is this future we want? I like to think that all of us want to have a better future, right? We want to have this idea of economic development. We want to know we're safe. We want to think about economic security, environmental justice, energy equity, public health. But we are still focused on this idea of profits as the main reason for being. And when you look at the global space that we're living in, we have a situation where most of the world have focused around organizing their national strategies around the United Nations Sustainable Goals, 17 goals and 169 targets, which range from anything from women's equality, to oceans, to education, to energy, to transformation. And I wanted to put on board the one of reducing inequality, because that actually is a big question in America. How are we going to treat with the rising inequality as we have more and more mega millionaires and billionaires and more people living on the verge of the poverty line? How are we going to treat with this rising inequality if we can't come to grips with the idea of a living wage, what that might mean, and balance out what it means to have a capitalist society, but have a capitalist society that's also a compassionate and caring capitalist society? These are some of the questions that we must answer. And so we find that in the United States, Jeffrey Sachs, who is a well-known economist, has tried to put into place this idea of a SDGs for America that says we can't deal with 17 goals, but we can certainly talk about 7. And they have been put forward as ones that look at education is one that he's talking about. He's also looking at the issue of access to living wage and jobs, and I think healthcare are 4 of the ones that they are concerned with. So when we think about that, the SDGs for America, I want to bring that down now to Hartford and say, what might that mean? Because we heard a lot about Hartford, I'm not going to go into that unless I think about Hartford, but we just heard about the census numbers here, and we know that it's one of the poorest cities in the nation, with 3 out of every 10 families living below the poverty threshold. And the demographic trends are critical because you're losing numbers. And so what might that mean in terms of the census? Because, as you heard, the census matters when you think about numbers because it deals with political representation. There's concern about if you lose numbers, you lose a seat in Congress, for example. It determines how state and federal dollars are distributed. So, do we need to build more hospitals, more public health clinics, more elementary schools, or do we need to take that money and put into worker retraining to deal with companies that are closing down and losing jobs so we can prepare these people who are mid-level career people for the jobs of the future? It also deals with planning for healthcare and wellness programs, and more importantly, it also deals with the issues of social security. And for those of you who are immigrants in the room, What the census doesn't know, the reason why many immigrants care about the census, is that for us it also deals with the issue of how do we count our communities so we can do some of the things that we're interested in doing, be they festivals, so we can let people in corporate America understand that we too are their consumers and supporters, be diaspora organizing around issues of foreign policy so we can advocate our agenda to people at the federal level. And certainly we have found that in the last 10 years, the State Department itself has moved towards working with diasporas in order to help flesh out and personalize what they're calling transformational diplomacy, recognizing much of the work that the State Department is trying to do around the world to bring democracy and peace and prosperity to the other parts of the world can be done by helping their diasporas here engage differently back home. So these are just some of the things we want to think about. So what might be some of the things that you think about for Hartford 2030 that you will need to be doing once you get your census numbers, once you respond? You want to think about this idea of a smart Hartford, a Hartford that really talks about how do you put in place sustainable healthcare and education and transportation systems. You want to have a Hartford that certainly is looking at meaningful metrics. Might we consider having organizations that focus on well-being as a driver for change, that look at the people and the planet, or people and place, before profit as part of your system? You certainly want to have agency and agility in terms of your government. You want to be able to support your government by prodding them to do what they must do to make sure that you have the flourishing life you want to have. And of course, as I said before, you have to think about resilience. And finally, the transformative use of technology. What you're really being asked to do at this moment is consider a reimagining of the American dream. We want to have an America that's prosperous, resilient, more equal, healthier. We want to have a country of cohesive communities, no longer the rural-urban divide or the East Coast-West Coast divide or the heartland-coastland divide. We want to have an America of vibrant culture and inclusive diversity. We want to also have a globally responsible America. That, I think, is the future we want. Now, the question is, how can we get there? How can we get to a country with virtually no poor children, a nation that each child grows up entitled to explore life possibilities, and an economic system that's not organized on the principle of command and control of the few giving orders to the many? We see already that many of the young people, certainly the technology communities, the millennials, respond very differently to the way the world works. Most millennials at work want to feel that their life has meaning, their work has meaning. I got a very interesting email from a recent intern that said to me, you know, Dr. Nelson, I try not to do any work on Saturdays and Sundays, and I encourage you also to think about your work-life balance. I mean, I fell apart because I'm like, I'm working like, you know, Saturdays, Sundays, I'm at my computer slugging away, trying to keep this community going. So how is it we get there? How are we going to get to be the parents of our future as opposed to being the children of our past? I like to say that, as Buckminster Fuller says, that on the spaceship Earth, there are no passengers. There are absolutely no passengers. We are all crew. And we, each and all and every one of us, have the responsibility for this thing called the American democracy. This experimentation, if you will, in the human family, coming together from our diverse places and cultures and ways of being to create a new society on this fertile ground that is called hope. We need to be about activating our responsibility, right? For the principle of self-determination. It demands that we think about long term, not just the short term. I can assure you, in my work with futurists from around the world, that Chinese people, the Chinese futurists, are talking about 100 years into the future of China. That's what they're writing about. They're not talking about the next 2 years, the next 10 years. So if we're talking about a situation where we're now on the cusp of being able to destroy ourselves so many times over. We can blow ourselves up, we can burn ourselves down, we can use diseases. Now we have, all these drones that can probably spread anthrax all over the place. I mean, you name it, we can do it. How do we create a new mindset that allows us to shift what prosperity and inclusion looks like for the future? We want to have public schools that function. We want to have integration into well-being objectives and ensure that governments do what they say they're going to do when they're on the campaign trail. I urge you then to be involved and get involved as citizens of this city. And I think the census is a good place to start, because as you put together your complete count committees, and I'm urging you all to put together complete count committees across different ethnic groups or different civil organizations, so you can support what the census is doing. This is necessary because people require trusted voices to remind them that it is easy and it's important and it's safe. And I tell you, it's a cosmic joke that I'm up here talking about it. Because when I came to America, when I was at school, 1990, I just moved to Washington, D.C. So 1990, the first census came, poof, it was into the garbage. Next thing you know, census 2000, poof, into the garbage. And then somehow I got like a stroke of lightning, and by 2010, there I was, national profile partner for the census. I tell you, talk about cosmic joke, I have been there. So I feel that it's time that all of us wake up to the realization of the meaning of the census for the future prosperity of the American dream that we have come here for in the first place. I want to say, beyond that idea of the census, some of these same complete count committees can become the imaginal cells. Like when a butterfly is being transformed from a caterpillar, it goes through this period where it's an imago, right? I believe that some of these same complete count committees can become imaginal cells of the future of the communities we want to create. What do I mean by that? You can organize around the idea of a program of initiative called Imagine Hartford 2030, where you engage your policymakers and your politicians in a conversation on the future you want. Your organizers, your storytellers, your techno geeks, your filmmakers, all of you will be involved in this process. So I want to end where I began. And as we think about America 2030 and Hartford 2030, we have to ask and answer the questions. Will we as Americans be better off? Are we going to have city and state governments that are equipped to lead us in this VUCA Industry 4.0 world? Are we going to ensure that the diverse views of we the people are reflected in the policies that are going to be driven in the next 10 years? And do we want to help make progress on the things that matter to us most? Robert F. Kennedy once said, "The future is not a gift, it is an achievement." And so I urge you to step forth and become a leader in this space, understanding that you have a responsibility to this society. In the Akan tradition of Sankofa, let us go back and fetch the attitude of solidarity that allows us to collaborate across borders and boundaries of race and gender and ethnicity, so that we can prevent problems that are occurring from getting any worse and help our leaders do a better job in meeting their objectives. We know, as I said earlier, that we have a responsibility not just to ourselves, but the 7 generations of the future to come. And so we must become actionaries for evolutionary change, not reformational change, but transformative and evolutionary change. We must become leaders that face the future not from a point of view of future shock, but from a sensibility that we have the capacity to be the leaders we want to be and to help to transform America to what it must be. And so I ask you to choose today to help give birth to a new paradigm of this emerging civilization around the world and right here in this country we call home, America. to be the fathers and mothers of a sustainable future that is seeking to be birthed. That is what I have come to ask you to join with me in believing that is possible. I dare you to believe that this future is possible with me. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson. We're going to transition just a moment and go off program for just a moment because the mayor of Hartford is here.
Okay.
And he'd like to present you with a proclamation.
Oh, okay.
So, is the mayor still here? I'm sorry, I looked right over you, I'm sorry. How are you, sir? It's so good to see you. Let's put you up here on the podium. Good to see you again. Neela?
Oh. Thank you so much.
Start?
I guess I guess.
All right.
So there you go.
Good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is. Good evening, everyone. Wow, that was an incredible presentation. Dr. Nelson, thank you so much for that presentation. Thank you we're so excited and honored to have you here in Hartford today. And I wanted to come by, before I say what I was going to say, let me just say two things about what you said. One, 1636 was the year that Hartford was founded. So in 2036, we turned 400. So as we embark on that mission that you asked us all to embark on, envisioning our future, what will we look like in 2030, we move that 6 years down the road, we say, what do we look like when we turn 400? And it's a pretty remarkable thing. So we're going to be doing a city planning exercise, and our planning department and our planning commission has already begun that effort, but it's as good a time as any to invite all of you to be part of that. And we've begun sending out surveys and asking what it is that you want your community to see. And hopefully, exactly, and if you filled it out already after seeing this presentation, maybe you want to go back and fill it out some more or again, because you might have some different ideas. So thank you for that. The second thing is thank you for highlighting the importance of the census. We have formed a complete count committee in the city of Hartford. We invite everyone to be part of that as well. I'm sure this was said earlier, but it is vitally important, everything from our political representation to the dollars that we get from the state and federal government to just knowing who we are as a city and as a community. And to help shape our future, it's helpful to know our present. And so we encourage everybody to fill that survey out without fear. We are a welcoming and inclusive community, and regardless of what questions end up on there, it's important to say that it is a secure process, and we hope everyone stands up to be counted. And so thank you for that as well. Now, finally, since Dr. Nelson was so instrumental in the establishment on a national level of the National Caribbean American Heritage Month, and even though June is the actual Caribbean American Heritage Month, since you're here today, we thought that this was the right time for us to make the formal declaration of next month as National Caribbean American Heritage Month. And as you well know, in Hartford, we are very proud and blessed to have an incredibly strong and active and vibrant and engaged Caribbean American community. It is, in fact, our largest immigrant group in a city that is made strong by immigration. So it's with particular pride and honor that we share in that celebration. And so I just want to read this one proclamation in gratitude to you. Whereas June is National Caribbean American Heritage Month, a time to recognize the importance of Caribbean people and their descendants in the history and culture of the United States. Whereas former President Barack Obama, at your urging, signed the United States Caribbean Strategic Engagement Act, which created a multi-year strategy for expanding and improving relations with the various governments of the Caribbean region. Whereas since the U.S. Strategy for Engagement in the Caribbean was released in 2017, groups such as Advocacy to Legacy Inc., Millward and Associates International, the Jamaican Diaspora Show, have worked tirelessly to promote implementation and support the implementation of the strategy, primarily in the areas of education, health, and trade. Whereas the city of Hartford's Caribbean community is one of the strongest and largest in the nation and would benefit greatly from the full implementation of the strategy. And whereas Dr. Claire Nelson, futurist, White House champion for change, founder and president of the Institute of Caribbean Studies, and architect of the campaign to establish National Caribbean American Heritage Month, is visiting Hartford to discuss the future of the American dream and the impact of the 2020 census on immigrant communities. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Luke Bronin, Mayor of the City of Hartford, along with the Court of Common Council and the citizens of Hartford, express our gratitude to Dr. Claire Nelson and proclaim the month of June 2019 as National Caribbean American Heritage Month in the City of Hartford. Thank you so much. Sure. Should we,
So everyone, thank you for that brief digression from our program. I would like to have Dr. Nelson and Ms., would you please come up and to the to answer questions. We're going to have a Q&A period now, and then we'll close out our program. I know I'm utterly inspired by the things that I've heard this evening. You talked to Dr. Nelson about us signing up for the cause of the complete census and signing up with you to be part of the visioners of this new future. Could you maybe go into a little more detail about what it takes, what the next actions would be for us to advocate for this future?
I think that the census is really a great time to springboard, and I am actually excited that the city is beginning its process of planning for 2036, so you have a really good opportunity to engage. This idea of the complete count committee, in 2010, between 2009 and 2010, it was a time when many Caribbean people around the country got organized for the first time in a different way. And the idea was they wanted to be counted because, you see, all these carnivals that they do, we don't have any statistics to give to the companies that say we exist and we buy things. So it's hard to get corporate America to even sponsor us. So it's really in our own interests to participate. And basically this requires a couple of people coming together and saying we want to do this at the local level. What we would like to see at ICS is to have every state where we have significant numbers of Caribbean people have a separate complete Caribbean count. Why is this? Because the new census form, which I have to say I was an advocate for and supporter of, has the race question, and there is a sub-question under the race and ethnicity question that says, what is your country of ancestry? So that big fight we used to have before, well, what are you? You don't know if you are colored, you are not Negro, you are African, you are Asian, but you come from Guyana, that problem is solved. You check whatever race you think you are, and then you simply write in your country of origin. That will mean that at the end of the day, when we come back and now approach the census, or when they do their workshops and say, here's how you get the data you need, we can go in and get the data we want to say, well, how many people have listed these 25 countries that we consider Caribbean? So that is why having a complete Caribbean count is important to educate Caribbean people, whether you consider yourself mixed or other or white Caribbean or Asian Caribbean because your parents are Chinese or Indo-Caribbean, you would check the box for your race and then write in your country of origin. We can still get to know then how many Jamaicans, how many St. Lucians. And trust me, even the embassies now are harassing, well, how is this going to work? We need to know who. They want to know where the diaspora is. Why? Because the remittance remittances. Almost every developing country, certainly in Africa and the Caribbean and some parts of Asia, are benefiting from remittances coming from this country. And they need to also understand how that is working. So it's really very critical. And it just requires people coming together and say, we want to do this. It's a voluntary lab of labor. So it requires people who are passionate.
So let me does everybody in the room understand what a remittance is?
I have a question. How many people that will apply for the U.S. Census program for 2020? And secondly, how many people that will come to the door that is saying how many people how many residents that come to the door that knock out the door and stuff like that.
So I think you're asking how many people are going to be working on the census to count people here in the state. I don't know if we have an exact number as yet, but I do know that there are numbers of people that are being employed now to take care of census and going to door. You'll also recall that it was mentioned earlier in the presentation that we will have the opportunity to fill out our census information online and by phone this year. So that's just an additional opportunity for you. I hope that helps.
Yeah, if I fill up the paper and
If you fill out the paper and send it in, that still works too. Okay? Okay. So,
I cannot do the online.
oh, okay. Well, then if you fill out the paper, it still works. Okay? So, Dr. Nelson, I wanted to go back to one of the things you said. It's called remittances, and I'm not sure everybody understands in the room what a remittance is. So
So remittance is very simple. Our money that's sent back home to your home country. So whether you're from Jamaica, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Philippines. Philippines has a lot of remittance. In fact, when the State Department was very involved in this whole getting the diaspora engaged process, we were ICS, my nonprofit, the Philippine organization. There was a Mexican group, an Ecuadorian group, and I think an Ethiopian group. There were two more, I can't remember where those two were from, but at least those four were chosen by State Department as a pilot project of how they could strengthen diaspora groups to be stronger, because they were trying to, and they chose those groups because of the number of remittances that come from those communities to their home country. So everybody knows that Ethiopians do very well in America, especially in the Washington, D.C. area. So, they own half of everything, particular parking lots. But so there certainly are major, sending home of money, and of course Western Union and the other companies like
Wells Fargo,
MoneyGram are very much in that business. And of course now we have more online systems trying to compete for that money. So it's a big issue.
Right, okay. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was clear on that issue. I thought I knew, and I was right, but let's be clear. So I want to go to Dr. Vernal now. I know you've focused many of your exhibits and the studies and the work that you're doing at University of Connecticut on the Afro-Caribbean community. Can you talk a little bit about the shifts in population in the Afro-Caribbean community from, let's say, Hartford to the suburbs, some of the things that you've observed in your studies that show us how these populations are changing and diversifying?
So in the last 4 years, I've had 2 exhibitions that explore the history of the Caribbean population. Here, the first one explored the first generation of folks who came here in the 1940s to work in the tobacco industry. We were able to find about 245 West Indians in the 1950 census. There are probably a few more than that, but about 245 made it into the census.
And that was in 1950?
That was in the
Wow, big
1950
change.
census.
Yeah.
And so one of the goals of the exhibit is to explore how we go from these 245 West Indians in 1950 to the 2010 census of West Indians becoming the largest foreign-born population in the state. The next exhibit, which actually just came down in April, wanted to explore in more fine grain how the really high home ownership rates among West Indians and the phenomena. Everybody talks about the white flight to the suburbs, but there was also a black flight to the suburbs that unfolded after the disturbances and violence in the 1960s, and a significant proportion of that flight to the suburbs was a West Indian flight. And so in relation to what Dr. Nelson was talking about, in order for us to have these numbers matter, we actually have to be able to communicate that to the people who pass laws based on these figures, that West Indians are a significant proportion of the population who are paying property taxes. But until we have that kind of meaningful data, it's really hard for us to have that kind of voice. So one of the purposes of that exhibition is to both unearth that data, but also communicate to the public so that when they're talking to their legislators and they're talking to the local senators, they can say, they can be informed and they can be empowered to talk about this long demographic trend and how much they've contributed to the state of Connecticut as well as to the city of Hartford.
Wow. So I think you would say it's a long and continuing demographic trend as well.
70 years.
I'm sorry?
70 years.
Yeah, 70 years, wow. So, I mean, the microphone is open for questions for the audience. Are there any questions anyone in the audience here would like to pose to Dr. Vanel or Dr. Nelson? Anyone? Well, I've had one from you. Let me get one from this side of the room. Anyone? So I've got, please.
Dr. Nelson, what do you see as the future of work with so much being taken over by robotics? Will people be working as many hours a day?
You know, that's a topic I'm certainly very interested in. What's going to be the future of work? Because there's this kind of very blithe response that people, oh, there have been new jobs created. But the fact is, since the industrial age, we have always seen that, yes, there have been new jobs created, but they tend not to be in as many numbers. So that's the first question. The second thing is, well, let's say as we age, then perhaps what will happen is that the millennials who are now going to be, let's say, in their 40s and 20 years, because they've grown up in this idea of a sharing economy, they may also be open to the idea of having a shared jobs. Because if their values shift and they say, well, we don't need to work, we just want to be happy, which is, in other words, if the whole idea of having enough becomes the standard by which we now live, as opposed to more, because we certainly are doing too much of the more, then we may be able to kind of constrain ourselves. Certainly, I think that the state of Oregon and New Jersey, for example, has made a decision that they're going to have, for example, gas station jobs be only humans. So you can't pump your own gas in those states. So citizen states are going to have to make some tough decisions, certainly in the short run, as to what they might allow some companies to do. Or, you know, so because if you have so many people that are out of work, there's also talk about having like, what, I forget the correct term for it, but like you pay people not to work. Well, we already have that in a way in America. We have Social Security if you're not working, or unemployment, what do you call it, thing you can get, benefits. But Europe and other countries are exploring this idea that you pay people just to stay home because they have to live off of something. But the question then becomes, what does it mean though to be a human? Because there are many people we are defined in terms of our own emotional and psychological needs by the work we do. So it's not someone of working because we have to make money. And so do we have the right kind of studies to show that moving towards that kind of lifestyle may not more quickly move to more depression and suicide and a more dystopian way of life? So these are the kind of questions that we really have to ask and answer as we look at what decisions are we going to make about how much technology is enough, and not because we can do something means we ought to do it, and how do we have that balance between new technologies as well as having enough people having meaningful work so we can continue to thrive as spiritual beings.
Wow. Please, Dr. Roll.
So I have a question that follows on what you just said. You talked about technology transforming cities 20 or 30 years from now, right? So can you just comment on our current, and when I people who are doing technology and AI, typically women are not there and other persons are not there either because it's not really inclusive. So could you comment on the current strategy in terms of STEAM, when we talk about STEAM education, is it sufficient to be inclusive? What else do we need to do?
I'm trying to hear you better.
What else do we need to do in terms of, is the current strategy in terms of STEAM education sufficient to meet what you talked about in terms of the future? Technology in the future.
I don't think what we're doing is sufficient. As you know, the Office of Technology Assessment closed down, so there's no national body that's really looking at these choices we're making. We're kind of just like following whatever the tech people say. And so there needs to be like the human future people that are saying, hey, we know that all this thing is wonderful, it's great that we can do all these things, but if we really automate truck drivers, for example, what are we going to do with that? How much 80, how much thousand or 100 and something thousand truck drivers that are not going to be working? Now, that's a conversation that goes beyond whether or not it's safe to have an automated truck or there may be more accidents on the truck. And they might be say, okay, let's move between, they make a decision that we'll have a hybrid vehicle, right, that hits the road in the next 10 years that says we're not going to allow an automated truck to exist for at least another 15 years until people have had this transition where we have a hybrid truck plus person vehicle. Now, the airline crash is a good point of that, right? They moved very quickly. Let's put this plane in place, but there were not sufficient tests done to make sure that the humans and the interface were sufficiently robust and resilient. So I think that given that there's no federal technology assessment, one of the things I've thought about, what if either the mayors or the governors can say, let us as governors make a fiat decision and say, we as governors want to have some kind of technology assessment around automated driving, for example, before we as states make a decision to go down that road. That might be one like concrete thing that people could advocate around. I certainly think, I don't see the unions doing enough. I think they're very like resistant. The unions believe that we're going to stick in the, whatever year. And while I recognize that unionism is important, the unions ought to think about what else will they be doing when we have a gig economy. The fact is that's the way we're going. People still, if you have a gig economy and healthcare is not there, you don't have portable retirement, might the union reimagine itself as a sort of a collective force that continues to provide support for people in the shared economy to have those things. But the union is not there yet. They're still just trying to hold on to what is. So they also need to make a shift.
Wow. Cool. So I want to go back to something. Oh, please. Can you hear that, Dr. Nelson? With the internet in place, will that help people be able to have more ways to generate income from home so more people can work at home?
Well, yes, that's quite true. But the fact is that to work from home, you still need to have a job to get. So working from home, that's happening now in Bangalore. One of my virtual assistants, one of my virtual assistants is in Morocco, one is in Jamaica, and one is in the Philippines. Why? Because as a nonprofit, I can afford to pay them $5 an hour. I can't afford to pay people here, quote unquote, a living wage of $20 an hour. That's just my reality. So as you think about this balance between what is a living wage, recognizing that the internet now creates a level playing field for people from the world to participate in this global economy, we have to really think about Can society afford to make a fiat and say every single small business must pay quote-unquote a living wage if some small businesses will not be able to survive that cost? That's another conversation that has to happen at the local level. So maybe there are other things that has to happen. Maybe it's more important for people to have health care than to have a living wage. Maybe it's more important for people to have affordable housing than a living wage, because they need a living wage because the housing is out of whack. So how can we ensure that the developers don't game the system and make it impossible for people to live where they are? I mean, why should teachers and firemen and police and working class people have to live quite out in the burbs and have to drive how many hours to get to their jobs to protect quote unquote people? It makes no sense.
So it needs to be a bigger formula than just the living wage and the internet access to work. You know, in the vision you describe, work, housing, and health are leveled equally. So you get a living wage, you are able to get basic housing with that wage and basic health care with that wage. So maybe there's some balancing that happens, yes? Some balancing that happens between them. Yeah. So yeah, that's cool. So I want to go back to something, oh, please.
Documented immigrants. People were documented, obviously there's brochures and there's ways to get in touch with them. What about undocumented people who are here in this country? How would they be a part of the census? Will the government board look for them? Because obviously a lot of these people will not be willing to come forward.
So what I learned earlier today from our expert on the census that is here, who can't speak on camera at this moment, is that everyone should be counted. And that even if you're undocumented, you can respond to the census because you are an individual that lives in America. So there's no requirement to be documented to respond to the census. So you can dial a phone number, you'll get a PIN number, you can go online, you will get a document at your address that you can fill out, or a census worker is going to come knock on the door. You should respond to the census, documented or undocumented. Helps? Okay, so I have one last question. Can I take the last one? And this was something that you said during your presentation, Dr. Nelson. You said in the future of 2040, there would be people in homes and people in the population and people living underwater and in space, but there would be less and less sounds of children in the home. And I think what you were alluding to is the changing birth rate in the globe and in the US. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, there's not really much to add. The fact is that our birth rate is slowing. I think it might be a good thing, quite frankly. I think we're near the carrying capacity of the earth as we know it. There's this concept of donut economics that says we're approaching, let's say, the edge in terms of carbon, fluorocarbons, water, and the economics we have been using have made assumptions around these resources being never ending, right? Now, part of the reason why we're having this race for space is because as we go into 5G and virtual reality and all those things, we need cheaper and cheaper minerals, which are very plentiful in space. The question I ask as we talk about going to space is like, well, who is going to own that? And when I hear certainly in my futurist meetings, people talking blithely about mining the moon and mining asteroids, I'm like, well, suppose they mine it and then they shift the trajectory of this thing. And then they say, but there's nothing we can do about it. This is just like out there doing nothing. I'm like, wait a minute, guys. Do you know the moon actually controls our tides? The moon is not up there doing nothing. So we really need to be much more mindful of things that seem not relevant. But I like to tell people who say, oh, you're talking about this crazy stuff. I'm like, well, you know, I'm not really living on the edge where I have to worry about my next meal. So in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'm not in the survival mode, right? And I think I'm a little bit above the, okay, I'm watching my back mode. So those of us who have a little bit of comfort need to just take the responsibility and think for those people who might not have the comfort because they have to be like, you know, rushing to their 3 jobs to say, in my spare time, I'm going to think about these critical issues because it's going to affect me, my grandchildren, or my great-grandchildren. And so, yes, there will be fewer humans, but hopefully the fewer humans are not going to live in a dystopian future, but more what I call there's no such word actually. You either have a utopia where everything is glorious. Well, unfortunately, we're humans. Everything will not be glorious because we are encased in this physical body where we fight about foolishness, right? And we bomb our people even though we are worshiping the same one God, be they Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever, right? Because this is who we are. But I think because we have no word for it is exactly why it doesn't exist. We have a dystopia on the one hand and we have a utopia. Why can't we just have like a normatopia? Most of us are living like normal lives. We're not like, suffering in, countries where we don't have water and we don't have food and we don't have housing. And we're not actually living on yachts, with gold-plated toilets either. Most of us are having normal lives. And so my dream and my passion is that more of us will come together to have these conversations, create these imaginary cells, and really create communities of the future, that whether we be transhuman or cyborg or whatever, because we're going to all have some parts of our body made up of plastic.
We'll all need a little replacement
We
parts,
will
right?
still be living a very human, flourishing future. That's what I believe in.
Awesome, thank you. I think I'm out of time for questions, so thank you to the panel. Thanks so much. And I think we have a little housekeeping to take care of. There's someone with another proclamation, yes? No? Okay. So each of you received an evaluation form. If you've gotten that, would you please fill that out? And someone's pointing at me. Is there a question? I was saying, each of you received an evaluation form. We'd love it if you could fill those out and drop them at the desk on your way out. And before you do that, there's a gentleman who is going to come talk to us, Mr. Errol Smith, who is the chairman of the West Indian Social Club of Hartford.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Errol Smith. I'm the chair. Good evening. Thanks. My name is Errol Smith. I'm the chairperson for the West Indian Social Club, and I think I have the easiest job here tonight. And my job is to close this presentation. But before I do that, I'd like to thank everyone for being here tonight. The information that we got from here, I'd like for everyone to pass it on. To make sure the information gets disseminated. Outside as you enter, there's a lot of information about the census. Make sure you grab a copy and also pass it out to your family. I think one of the biggest challenges I think that we face as a community is that as an immigrant, and there's a lot of undocumented people within our community, there is going to be a fear of coming forward to do the census, especially in the political climate that we live in. So it's very important that the information is key. Information is transformational, that you tell everyone that there will be no, it's okay it's a safe process. No one's going to track who you are. And it's very important that that word gets out. So in 2020, the congressional and presidential election is not the only political event that's going to be happening in 2020. The census is, because the census is going to determine how much money it comes in our community. How the congressional and districts gets drawn up. So it's very important that people remember that. So again, I'd like to thank everyone for being here. I'd like to thank the sponsors of this event. They're in the back of the brochure that you have. But I'd like to call them by name. The sponsors, Advocacy for Legacy, the Cricket Hall of Fame, Hartford 2000, the Harvard Foundation for Public Giving, the Harvard Public Library, Hartford Public Access TV, the Jamaican Diaspora Show, the West Indian Foundation, and also the West Indian Social Club. And I'd also like to thank the moderator, Lisa, for doing a phenomenal job. You said this is your first time being a moderator. I find it very hard to believe, but very, very nice job. The panelists, Dr. Fiona Vernal, Paul from the Census Bureau, Dr. Nelson, thank you very, very much for being here. And before I close the program, Dr. Nelson, could you come here? I have a proclamation here from the governor of Connecticut to present to you. So the mayor had to run, but this is from the governor of Connecticut. And I'll just read a portion of it. It says, whereas June is the National Caribbean American Heritage Month, a time to recognize the significance of Caribbean people and their descendants in the history and culture of the United States. And whereas this month, which is being presented earlier, features events that celebrates the rich cultural traditions and history of the Caribbean people in the United States. Whereas Dr. Claire Nelson, futurist, White House champion for change, and the architect of the successful campaign to establish June as National Caribbean Heritage Month, visit Hartford in May 2019 to deliver a talk on the future of the American dream as it relates to the perspective of the 2020 census for immigrants. And whereas the City of Hartford takes the opportunity to recognize Dr. Claire Nelson, PhD, during this visit as convening chair of the National Caribbean Heritage Month, and whereas the Caribbean population in Connecticut is the largest immigrant population in the state, and the Jamaican population, the third largest population in the United States now. Therefore, I, Ned Lamont, Governor of the State of Connecticut, do hereby declare June 2019 as Caribbean American Heritage Month in the state of Connecticut. And this is presented on behalf of the Governor to you. Thank you very much.